At 2:17 a.m., Washington time, the signal changed. Inside the White House Situation Room, screens still glowed with satellite feeds, radar tracks, and projected strike paths. The plan had been written. The targets had been mapped. The order almost given. Then came the pause. On the 15th of the month, President Donald Trump issued an instruction that rippled outward like a shockwave through every capital in the Middle East. The attack on Iran was suspended, not cancelled, not abandoned, suspended. In military language, that single word carries weight. It means the finger is no longer squeezing the trigger, but it is still inside the guard. Within minutes, global newsrooms lit up. Analysts searched for explanations, allies demanded clarification, adversaries recalculated, and yet, beneath the surface calm, the machinery of war did not stop. Aircraft remained fueled. Crews stayed at readiness. Naval formations continued their movement through darkened seas. This was not de-escalation. It was hesitation under pressure. What made this moment extraordinary was not only the American pause, but the voices urging it. Israel, the United States' closest regional ally, quietly signaled restraint. Arab capitals, often divided, spoke in rare unison. They warned Washington that one strike could collapse the entire regional balance. At 3:01 a.m., Middle Eastern air defense networks stayed alert. Iran watched the skies. The silence felt temporary. History has shown that wars often begin not with explosions, but with pauses that fail. Even as the order was paused, the board was not cleared. Far from Washington, steel moved through water. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln continued its approach, cutting a deliberate path toward the Indian Ocean. Its movement was not announced. It did not need to be. Satellites do not blink. In geopolitics, motion is language. The Lincoln did not represent diplomacy. It represented optionality, the ability to act without warning. Fighter squadrons slept beneath its deck. Missile cells remained sealed but ready. At this same hour, Iranian command centers tracked every nautical mile. They understood the message clearly. The pause was political, not military. Pentagon planners kept strike scenarios alive. Digital maps remained open. Contingency trees were not deleted, only minimized. This duality defined the moment. Public restraint, private preparation. History offers a pattern. When deterrence becomes visible, miscalculation becomes lethal. Every movement invites interpretation. Every interpretation invites response. The Middle East has learned this lesson too many times. While fleets shifted at sea, the streets of Iran told a different story. On the night of the 15th, Mashhad, Iran's second-largest city, fell unusually quiet. The protests that once filled intersections thinned. The chants faded. But the silence was enforced. Armored vehicles rolled through main roads. Police lights painted walls red and blue. Soldiers stood at intersections with weapons low, but visible. This was not peace. It was containment. Video fragments leaked despite restrictions. They showed something more unsettling than chaos. Control. Tight formations. Coordinated patrols. Preemptive dominance of space. Elsewhere, another clip surfaced. The location was unclear. The message was not. Masked protesters gathered under streetlights, voices rising together against authority. Their numbers were smaller, but their defiance sharper. Authoritarian systems fear crowds less than they fear persistence. Tehran understood this, and it acted accordingly. On the night of the 14th, Iran closed its airspace. To the trained eye, this is not routine. It is a reflex learned through decades of threat. Commercial flights diverted. Radar corridors emptied. The sky prepared for intrusion. Sources later revealed what many suspected. A U.S. strike had been imminent. Orders were drafted, timelines aligned. assets synchronized. Then came the intervention. 4 Arab states, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and Egypt, activated emergency diplomacy. They warned both Washington and Tehran that escalation would not remain bilateral. One strike would become many. The pause followed hours later. In war planning, this is called a near miss. January 17th loomed like a deadline written in ink. Iran had signaled its intent to carry out mass executions, up to 800 individuals accused of participating in unrest. The world braced for irreversible consequence. Then, just hours before the scheduled moment, the trajectory shifted. President Trump announced that Iran had postponed the executions. One sentence, no details. Behind it stood coordinated pressure, diplomatic threats, military proximity, and economic consequence. One young man, Soutani, was spared. His sentence commuted. His life extended. He became a symbol, not of mercy, but of leverage. At approximately 8:40 p.m. Jerusalem time, a secure line opened between Tel Aviv and Washington. No cameras, no statements, only calculations. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not argue emotionally. He spoke clinically. He told President Trump that a strike on Iran at this moment would not achieve regime change. It would achieve something else, uncontrollable escalation. Israel's concern was immediate and physical. Iranian missile stockpiles were not theoretical numbers on a briefing slide. They were deployed systems spread across hardened sites, mobile launchers, and underground complexes. Even with layered defenses, Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow, no shield guarantees total interception. At 9:02 p.m., Israeli defense planners modeled retaliation scenarios. Missile saturation overwhelmed perfection in every simulation. Civilian casualties rose sharply after the first wave. This was the reversal of a familiar pattern. For decades, Israel had urged decisive action. Now, for the first time in this crisis, it advised delay. At 9:19 p.m., the warning landed at the White House, not as fear, but as probability. Deterrence, Israel argued, only works when consequences are survivable. This time, they might not be. The call ended without a decision, but the silence afterward carried weight. By 11 p.m. Washington time, Pentagon assessments were circulating internally. The tone was blunt, almost cold. The force posture in the region was insufficient for decisive war. 6 surface combatants, limited fighter squadrons, no massed ground presence, no redundancy. Iran, the briefing stated, was not Iraq in 2003. It was a state that had spent decades preparing for asymmetric survival. Hardened infrastructure, dispersed command, redundant leadership. At 11:27 p.m., planners ran strike simulations. Even a launch of 400 Tomahawk missiles produced limited strategic effect. Air defenses degraded, but not collapsed. Command nodes damaged, but not decapitated. The comparison surfaced repeatedly. Ukraine. Firepower without political collapse. Attrition without resolution. At 11:54 p.m., the conclusion was clear. Power existed. Victory did not. At 6:12 a.m., local time near Palawan, satellite imagery captured the moment. USS Abraham Lincoln altered course. The turn was subtle, just degrees on a chart, but its meaning was unmistakable. The carrier aimed toward the Malacca Strait, the gateway to the Indian Ocean. This was not a drill, not a routine transit. At cruising speed, the Lincoln would arrive in weeks. At flank speed, days. Nuclear propulsion erased logistical delay. Fuel was irrelevant. Endurance was assumed. At 6:47 a.m., regional naval commands updated threat assessments. The pause in Washington now had a shadow. By mid-morning, the full formation was clear. 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanked the carrier, their Aegis systems fully integrated. Radar envelopes overlapped. Missile cells stood sealed but primed. Below the surface, an attack submarine moved without signature. No flag, no name. This was the invisible layer, the one never discussed publicly. At 10:18 a.m., maritime analysts confirmed what the region already knew. This was no longer signaling. This was posture for action. At dawn on the U.S. East Coast, USS George H.W. Bush departed Norfolk. At nearly the same hour, the Theodore Roosevelt prepared for extended operations in the Pacific. 2 oceans began to move. History recognizes this configuration. It is not defensive, it is preparatory. By 34 minutes, analysts used a familiar term, a pincer. As fleets moved, the skies followed. Fighter squadrons redeployed. Tankers stretched range. Electronic warfare aircraft filled invisible corridors. At 2 a.m. on the 18th, planners marked a deadline. By month's end, air dominance had to be achievable within hours, not days. Control before contact. Inside Iran, the streets grew quieter. Repression worked. By the final days of the month, the protests that once promised internal fracture were nearly gone. The strategic window narrowed. Strike early, underprepared, or strike later, alone. This was the dilemma facing the White House. History does not forgive indecision, and it never forgets who hesitated when time ran out.